Millionaire buys abandoned house and finds a girl with a baby that changes everything. It was a quiet evening, and Ethan sat in his penthouse, the city skyline glowing through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The world outside buzzed with life, but inside, the silence was deafening. The luxury around him, a sprawling living room with custom furniture, art pieces worth millions, and a view that most people could only dream of, felt hollow. Ethan had everything he could ever want, yet it all felt meaningless. The emptiness gnawed at him, a void that no amount of wealth or success could fill. He scrolled aimlessly on his laptop, looking through listings for properties, a habit that had become routine whenever he felt restless. Ethan didn't need another house. He already owned vacation homes in 5 different countries, none of which he visited often. But tonight, something made him pause. A listing caught his eye, a dilapidated, abandoned house in a small, forgotten town miles from the city. The photos were haunting. Broken windows, overgrown grass swallowing the driveway, and walls that seemed to sag under the weight of time. It wasn't the kind of property a man like him would ever consider. Yet there was something about it that he couldn't ignore. He leaned closer to the screen, studying the images. The house was a wreck, but it felt alive, as though it had stories to tell. He couldn't explain it, but he felt drawn to it, as if it was calling to him. Without overthinking it, Ethan made arrangements to visit the property. He needed to see it in person. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision, but something about it felt right. Maybe, he thought, this was the kind of project he needed to occupy his mind. The drive to the house was long, taking Ethan far from the familiar chaos of the city. The roads grew narrower, the landscape quieter, as he ventured deeper into the countryside. It was a beautiful drive, with rolling hills and trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. But as he approached the town, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt heavier, the silence more profound. By the time he reached the house, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows over the property. Ethan parked his car at the edge of the driveway, the tires crunching on the gravel. He stepped out, taking in the sight before him. The house looked even more forlorn in person, its crumbling facade and shattered windows staring back at him like empty eyes. The yard was a mess of tangled weeds and forgotten debris, and the fence that once surrounded the property leaned precariously, as though it might collapse at any moment. Yet, despite its state of decay, the house exuded a strange kind of beauty, a melancholic charm that tugged at something deep within him. He pushed open the rusted gate, the hinges screeching in protest, and made his way to the front door. The wooden steps creaked under his weight, and the doorknob felt cold and sticky as he turned it. The door swung open with a groan, revealing the interior of the house. The air was stale, thick with the smell of mildew and dust. His footsteps echoed in the emptiness as he stepped inside. The first thing he noticed was the silence. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet, but something heavier, almost oppressive. The house seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for him to disturb its stillness. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, the floors littered with debris, and the furniture, what little was left, was broken and covered in cobwebs. It was clear that no one had lived here for years. Ethan walked through the house slowly, his footsteps cautious. Every creak of the floorboards sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but something compelled him to keep going. Each room he entered felt like a time capsule, a glimpse into a life long forgotten. There were faded photographs on the mantel in the living room, their subjects unrecognizable beneath layers of grime. A broken mirror leaned against the wall, its shards reflecting fragments of light. As he moved deeper into the house, an uneasiness began to creep over him. It wasn't just the eerie silence or the way the shadows seemed to shift as the last light of the day faded. It was a feeling, a sense that he wasn't alone. He brushed it off, telling himself it was just his imagination. After all, the house was old, its creaks and groans, the natural sounds of decay. He climbed the staircase to the second floor, each step protesting under his weight. The hallway stretched ahead of him, dark and foreboding. Most of the doors were closed, their paint chipped and peeling, but one at the end of the hall stood slightly ajar. A faint light seeped through the crack, and Ethan's chest tightened. He wasn't sure why, but he felt drawn to it, as though it was beckoning him. He approached the door cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. As he got closer, he thought he heard something, a faint sound, almost like a whisper. He froze, straining to listen. It was so quiet that he couldn't be sure if it was real or just his mind playing tricks on him. Swallowing hard, he reached out and pushed the door open. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. In the corner of the room, huddled in the shadows, was a young girl clutching a baby to her chest. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear, and Ethan felt his breath catch. The girl couldn't have been more than 18, her clothes tattered and her face pale. The baby in her arms whimpered softly, and she began to rock it, whispering soothing words. "Please," the girl said, her voice barely audible. "Don't call anyone. Don't make us leave." Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. He had expected to find rodents, maybe a squatter or two, but not this. Not a girl and her baby hiding in the shadows of an abandoned house. For a moment he couldn't speak, couldn't think. All he could do was stare at the two of them, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know it yet, but this encounter would change everything. Ethan's thoughts raced as he stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the girl and her baby. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier. The young girl's face was a mixture of fear and defiance, as if she was bracing herself for him to lash out or demand answers. The baby whimpered again, a tiny sound that echoed in the tense silence, and the girl instinctively held it closer to her chest, rocking back and forth. She looked so fragile, so utterly out of place in this crumbling, forgotten house, yet there was a strength in her eyes that held Ethan captive. He took a slow step forward, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Hey," he said softly, his voice steady but gentle. "I'm not here to hurt you." The girl flinched, her grip on the baby tightening. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "We'll leave if you want us to. Just don't call anyone." Ethan hesitated, her words cutting through the fog of his thoughts. Call someone? The police? Social services? His first instinct had been to figure out who she was and why she was here, but now, faced with the raw desperation in her voice, all those questions seemed secondary. What mattered most was that she was terrified, and he couldn't bring himself to add to that fear. "You don't have to leave," he said finally, taking another cautious step forward. I didn't expect to find anyone here. Can you tell me your name?" The girl's eyes darted around the room, as if looking for an escape route. When she realized there wasn't one, she finally spoke. "Lucy," she said quietly. "And this is Hope." Ethan's chest tightened at the name. Hope. It was almost cruelly ironic, given the circumstances. The baby stirred in Lucy's arms, its tiny hand clutching at her shirt, and Ethan felt an unfamiliar ache in his chest. He wasn't the kind of man who spent much time around children, but something about the sight of the infant, so small and helpless, stirred something deep within him. "How long have you been here?" he asked, keeping his tone calm. Lucy hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "A few days," she admitted. "We don't stay in one place too long." Ethan's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of her story. The tattered blanket in the corner, the half-empty water bottle on the floor, the small bag of baby supplies, these were the only signs of her presence in the house. It was clear she was living on the edge, constantly moving, trying to survive. "Why this house?" he asked. "It's not exactly safe." Lucy lifted her chin slightly, a flicker of defiance returning to her eyes. "It's better than the streets," she said simply. "And it's quiet. No one bothers us here." The weight of her words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He thought about the luxury he'd driven away from just hours earlier, the penthouse with its endless views, the designer furniture he barely noticed, the fridge stocked with food he rarely ate. And here was this girl, barely more than a child herself, clinging to survival in a place that most people wouldn't even set foot in. "Lucy," he said softly, crouching down to meet her eye level. "You can't keep doing this. It's not safe for you or Hope. You need help." She shook her head fiercely, her arms tightening around the baby. "I don't need anyone's help," she said, her voice hardening. "We've been fine on our own." Ethan could hear the lie in her words, but he didn't push. Instead, he stayed where he was, his gaze steady and calm. "I'm not here to take anything from you," he said, "and I'm not here to judge, but you don't have to do this alone." Lucy's lip quivered, and for a moment Ethan thought she might break down. But she quickly composed herself, her expression hardening once more. "Why would you care?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "You don't even know us?" Ethan paused, caught off guard by the question. He didn't have an answer, at least not one that made sense. All he knew was that something about her and the baby had stirred something deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. "I don't know," he admitted finally, "but I can't just walk away from this." Lucy stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft breathing of the baby in her arms. Then, finally, she spoke. "What do you want from us?" she asked, her voice tinged with both fear and defiance. "Nothing," Ethan said firmly. "I just want to help." The next morning, Ethan couldn't shake the memory of Lucy and Hope from his mind. After leaving the house, he'd spent the night tossing and turning, replaying their conversation over and over. He kept seeing Lucy's face, so young, so worn, and the way she had clutched the baby as if the world itself was trying to take her away. The feeling in his chest, that strange ache, hadn't gone away. If anything, it had grown stronger. He decided to return to the house, this time with a plan. Before heading out, he stopped at a nearby store, filling a cart with essentials: baby formula, diapers, blankets, food that didn't require refrigeration. As he loaded the bags into his car, he felt a twinge of uncertainty. Would Lucy even accept his help? Or would she see it as another threat, another attempt to control her life? When he arrived at the house, it looked just as forlorn as before. Its sagging walls and overgrown yard, a stark contrast to the bustling world he'd left behind. Ethan parked at the edge of the driveway and approached the door slowly, his arms laden with the bags. He knocked lightly, not wanting to startle her. "Lucy," he called out, his voice gentle. For a moment there was no response. Then the door creaked open just enough for him to see Lucy's face peeking out. Her eyes were wary, but there was a flicker of recognition. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone guarded. "I brought some things for you and Hope," Ethan said, holding up the bags. "You don't have to take them if you don't want to, but I thought they might help." Lucy hesitated, her gaze shifting to the bags. For a moment, Ethan thought she might shut the door in his face, but then, slowly, she opened it wider, stepping aside to let him in. As Ethan entered the house, he couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. It was a small step, but it was something, and in that moment, he knew he was in this for the long haul. Lucy and Hope's story wasn't just theirs anymore. It was his too. And he was determined to help them find a way forward, no matter what it took. Ethan stood in the dimly lit living room, surrounded by the musty remnants of the house's former life. Lucy moved cautiously, still cradling Hope in her arms, her gaze darting from Ethan to the bags he had brought. The room was silent, save for the soft cooing of the baby and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Ethan set the bags down gently, the sound of the plastic rustling unnervingly loud in the otherwise quiet space. "I didn't mean to intrude," Ethan said softly, standing back to give Lucy space. "I just thought you might need some of these things. Formula, diapers, food, stuff for Hope." Lucy hesitated, her expression unreadable. She took a step closer, her arms tightening protectively around her daughter. Ethan could see the wariness in her eyes, the way her body remained tense, ready to flee at any moment. He didn't push her, didn't try to force her trust. Instead, he stayed where he was, his posture open, his hands at his sides. "Why are you doing this?" she asked after a long silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't even know us." Ethan's chest tightened. He had asked himself the same question more times than he could count since meeting Lucy and Hope. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I can't ignore this. I can't ignore you. It's not right for you and Hope to be here like this, alone." Lucy looked down at Hope, who was now awake and squirming slightly in her arms. The baby let out a soft whimper, and Lucy instinctively began to rock her. Ethan noticed the dark circles under Lucy's eyes, the exhaustion etched into her features. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, maybe weeks. His heart ached for her, for the unimaginable struggle she must have faced just to get to this point. "You don't know what we've been through," Lucy said finally, her voice trembling. "I've learned not to trust people. They always want something." "I don't want anything," Ethan said, his voice firm but gentle. "I just want to help." Lucy studied him for a moment, her eyes scanning his face as if searching for any hint of deception. Then, slowly, she lowered herself into a tattered armchair, still holding Hope. "We've been running," she said quietly, her words hesitant. "For months now. Hope's father, he's not a good man. I couldn't stay. I had to protect her." Ethan felt a surge of anger at the thought of anyone hurting Lucy or her daughter. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. "You don't have to run anymore," he said. "Not alone." Lucy's gaze softened slightly, but the fear in her eyes didn't fully disappear. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "He won't stop. He'll find us." Ethan stepped closer, lowering himself to her level so he could meet her eyes. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said. "I have resources, connections. I can help you stay safe." For the first time, Lucy's expression faltered. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she quickly turned her face away. "I don't want to owe anyone," she said, her voice barely audible. "I've spent my whole life owing people. I can't do it anymore." "You don't owe me anything," Ethan said firmly. "This isn't about me. It's about giving you and Hope a chance. A real chance." Lucy didn't respond, but Ethan could see the battle playing out in her mind, the fear of trusting a stranger against the desperate need for help. After a long silence, she finally nodded, her shoulders sagging as though the weight of her decision had drained her. The next day, Ethan returned to the house with more supplies and a plan. He had spent the night researching shelters, legal aid services, and ways to provide immediate assistance to Lucy and Hope. But when he arrived, he was met with a sight that made his heart sink. The front door was slightly ajar, and inside, the living room was empty. Lucy and Hope were gone. Panic surged through him as he stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of where they might have gone. The blanket was still in the corner, along with the small bag of baby supplies he had seen the day before. But there was no sign of Lucy or Hope. Ethan's mind raced. Had something happened to them? Had they been found? He stepped outside, his eyes scanning the overgrown yard and the surrounding street. "Lucy?" he called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. There was no response. Ethan's chest tightened. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He pulled out his phone and began searching for nearby shelters, hoping to find some clue as to where they might have gone. As he scrolled through the listings, a wave of frustration and helplessness washed over him. He had promised to help them, and now they were gone. But then, as he turned to leave, he heard a faint sound, soft and muffled, coming from the direction of the basement. Ethan hesitated, his heart pounding as he made his way toward the sound. The basement door was slightly ajar, and as he descended the creaking stairs, the sound grew louder. When he reached the bottom, he found Lucy sitting on the cold, damp floor, her back against the wall. Hope was in her arms, wrapped in a blanket, her tiny face nestled against her mother's chest. Lucy looked up at Ethan, her eyes red and swollen. "I thought you left," Ethan said softly, relief flooding through him. Lucy shook her head. "I got scared," she admitted. "I thought maybe it was a mistake, letting you help us, but I didn't know where else to go." Ethan crouched down beside her, his voice steady. "It's not a mistake, Lucy. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability. "I don't know how to do this," she said, her voice breaking. "I've been on my own for so long." "You don't have to do it alone anymore," Ethan said. "We'll figure it out together." In that moment, Ethan knew that his life had changed irrevocably. Lucy and Hope weren't just people he had stumbled upon. They were a chance for him to finally find the connection he had been searching for, and he was determined to do everything in his power to protect them and give them the future they deserved. Ethan's commitment to helping Lucy and Hope transformed his life in ways he could never have anticipated. The days that followed were filled with purpose and action, but they also brought unforeseen challenges. Ethan had expected the process of helping them transition into a stable life to be straightforward. After all, he had resources, connections, and the determination to make a difference. But what he hadn't accounted for were the layers of trauma, fear, and mistrust that Lucy carried with her, scars from a past she was still trying to escape. One of the first steps Ethan took was securing a temporary place for Lucy and Hope to stay. His own penthouse felt too overwhelming and impersonal, a stark reminder of his privilege that he didn't want to impose on them. Instead, he arranged for them to stay in a cozy, well-furnished apartment that provided safety and privacy. Lucy hesitated at first, reluctant to leave the anonymity of the abandoned house. But the moment she stepped inside and saw the crib set up for Hope, she softened. "It's nice," she said quietly, her fingers tracing the soft fabric of the baby blankets that Ethan had brought. "But this is too much. I can't accept all of this." Ethan crouched beside her, his tone gentle but firm. "This isn't charity, Lucy. This is what you and Hope deserve. A safe place, a warm bed, and a fresh start. You don't have to do this alone anymore." Lucy's lips quivered, but she nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. For the first time, she allowed herself to exhale, to feel the weight of her situation ease ever so slightly. But while the apartment gave her and Hope a physical refuge, the emotional barriers remained. Ethan's next step was finding legal help for Lucy. He contacted one of the top family law attorneys in the city, a woman named Helen Marks, who had built her career advocating for survivors of domestic violence. Helen agreed to meet with Lucy, and the conversation was both empowering and painful. For Lucy, recounting the details of her relationship with Hope's father was like ripping open old wounds. She spoke of the manipulation, the threats, and the moments of helplessness that had driven her to flee. "He used to say I'd never survive without him," Lucy said, her voice trembling as she clutched Hope in her arms. "That I wasn't strong enough, that no one would help me. And for a long time, I believed him." Helen leaned forward, her expression kind but resolute. "Lucy, the fact that you're sitting here today proves him wrong. You've already shown incredible strength by leaving and protecting your daughter. Now, it's our job to make sure he can't hurt you or Hope again." The process of filing for a restraining order and initiating custody proceedings was overwhelming for Lucy. There were moments when she wanted to give up, to retreat back into the shadows where it felt safer. But each time, Ethan was there, encouraging her, reminding her of the future she was fighting for, not just for herself, but for Hope. As the legal work progressed, Ethan took it upon himself to help Lucy navigate the practical aspects of rebuilding her life. He introduced her to a counselor who specialized in trauma recovery, a warm and patient woman named Dr. Elena Ramirez. Their first session was hesitant, with Lucy unsure of what to share or where to start. But over time, Dr. Ramirez's gentle guidance helped Lucy begin to untangle the emotional knots she had carried for so long. Meanwhile, Ethan found himself growing increasingly attached to Hope. The tiny baby had a way of softening even his hardest days. Her laughter was infectious, her curiosity boundless. Ethan often found himself marveling at how someone so small could bring so much light into a room. He'd never considered himself the paternal type, but with Hope, something shifted. He began to understand the profound responsibility and joy that came with caring for another life. One evening, as Ethan visited Lucy and Hope in the apartment, he found Lucy in the kitchen, nervously attempting to cook dinner. She turned to him, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I haven't done this in a long time," she admitted, gesturing to the half-prepared meal on the counter. "Cooking, it's not something I'm great at." Ethan chuckled, rolling up his sleeves. "Well, lucky for you, I'm not great at it either, but we can figure it out together." They spent the next hour fumbling through the recipe, laughing as they accidentally added too much salt and struggled to keep the baby entertained while chopping vegetables. By the end of the meal, the food was barely edible, but the laughter they shared was worth more than a gourmet dinner. For the first time, Lucy seemed to relax, to let down her guard and simply exist in the moment. But the calm was short-lived. As the weeks passed, Lucy's past loomed like a dark shadow over their progress. One evening, as Ethan was preparing to leave the apartment, Lucy's phone buzzed. She froze as she glanced at the screen, her face draining of color. "What is it?" Ethan asked, stepping closer. "It's him," Lucy whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's been calling from different numbers, leaving messages. He knows I'm not where I said I'd be. He's looking for us." Ethan's jaw tightened. He took the phone from her gently, scrolling through the messages. The content was chilling. Veiled threats, demands for her to return, promises that he would find her no matter what. "We're not going to let him scare you," Ethan said firmly. "You're safe here, Lucy, and we'll make sure he can't come near you or Hope again." Ethan contacted Helen and relayed the new developments. She moved quickly, filing additional motions and working with local law enforcement to ensure Lucy's safety. Ethan also took matters into his own hands, hiring a private security team to monitor the apartment and installing state-of-the-art surveillance equipment. He didn't tell Lucy all the details, not wanting to alarm her further, but he vowed to do whatever it took to protect her and Hope. Despite the fear, Lucy began to show a quiet strength that inspired Ethan. She attended every legal meeting, followed through with her therapy sessions, and started taking steps to regain control of her life. She even began talking about her dreams, things she hadn't allowed herself to imagine in years. "I used to love painting," she confessed one evening as they sat together. "Before everything happened, I wanted to be an artist, but that feels like another lifetime." "It doesn't have to be," Ethan said. "You still have that dream, Lucy, and now you have the chance to make it real." Lucy looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "You really think I can start over?" "I don't think it," Ethan said with conviction. "I know it." Their bond deepened as they navigated the challenges together. For Ethan, it was no longer just about helping Lucy and Hope. It was about being part of their journey, of their healing and transformation. And for Lucy, it was about learning to trust again, to believe in the possibility of a brighter future. But even as they moved forward, they both knew that the fight wasn't over. The past had a way of resurfacing when least expected, and the greatest test of their resolve was still to come. The days that followed Lucy's alarming phone call were a whirlwind of preparation and tension. Ethan poured every ounce of his energy into ensuring her and Hope's safety. He worked with the legal team to expedite the restraining order, coordinated with the private security team to monitor the apartment, and even had a direct line to law enforcement. Yet the unease lingered. Lucy tried her best to focus on her therapy sessions, her newfound routines with Hope, and the small joys she was beginning to rediscover. But the fear of her ex-partner finding them loomed like a shadow over everything. Ethan, too, felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had never cared for anyone the way he now cared for Lucy and Hope. They had become more than just people he was helping. They had become family. Every step he took was driven by a fierce determination to protect them and give them a chance at a new life. One late evening, Ethan arrived at Lucy's apartment with groceries. The security cameras had been upgraded, and the guard stationed outside assured him there was no suspicious activity. But as he knocked on the door and stepped inside, he immediately sensed something was off. Lucy was sitting on the couch, her arms wrapped tightly around Hope, her face pale and tense. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, setting the bags down. "He left a note," Lucy whispered, her voice trembling. "On the car parked outside. It said, 'I know where you are.'" Ethan's stomach turned. He clenched his fists, his mind racing with anger and concern. "Did anyone see him?" he asked, his voice sharp but calm. Lucy shook her head. "No one saw anything. The guard found it when he was doing rounds." Ethan took a deep breath, his protective instincts kicking into high gear. "Okay," he said firmly, "we'll handle this. I'll call Helen and the police. We're not letting him get anywhere near you." The note was enough to escalate the legal proceedings. Ethan's attorney worked tirelessly to push for immediate action, and law enforcement increased patrols in the area. But despite the heightened precautions, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something more needed to be done. He decided it was time for a change. "Lucy," he said one evening as they sat in the living room, Hope asleep in her arms, "I think it's time we moved you somewhere else, somewhere safer." Lucy's eyes widened. "Move? To where?" "My house," Ethan said simply. "It's more secure, and I'll be there to make sure you and Hope are protected. This apartment has been a good temporary solution, but it's not enough anymore." Lucy hesitated, her gaze dropping to the baby in her arms. "Ethan, you've already done so much for us. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," Ethan said, his voice steady. "You're family, and family looks out for each other." Tears welled up in Lucy's eyes, but she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "If you think it's the right thing to do." The move was swift and carefully orchestrated. Within days, Lucy and Hope were settled in Ethan's home, which had been transformed into a fortress of security. Ethan took every measure to ensure they felt safe, but he also worked to make them feel at home. He set up a nursery for Hope, filled with toys and a crib, and decorated a cozy room for Lucy with soft colors and personal touches. At first, Lucy struggled to adjust. The grandeur of Ethan's home felt overwhelming, a stark contrast to the life she had known. But Ethan's kindness and patience gradually eased her anxiety. He gave her space when she needed it and support when she asked for it. Slowly but surely, Lucy began to see the house not just as a shelter, but as a place where she could begin to heal. One night, as they sat by the fireplace, Ethan looked over at Lucy and asked, "What do you want, Lucy? Not just for now, but for the future. What's your dream?" Lucy thought for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the flickering flames. "I used to dream about painting," she said softly. "Before everything happened, I wanted to be an artist, but I gave that up a long time ago." "You don't have to give it up," Ethan said. "You can still be an artist. You can still follow that dream." Lucy shook her head. "It feels so far away, like it belongs to another life." "Then let's bring it into this life," Ethan said. "We'll set up a studio for you, get you the supplies you need. You deserve to have something that's yours, something that makes you happy." Lucy looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Why do you believe in me so much?" she asked. "Because I see how strong you are," Ethan said. "You've been through so much and you're still standing. That's not just strength, it's resilience. And I want to help you see that in yourself." The days that followed were filled with small but significant steps. Lucy started painting again, her first tentative strokes on the canvas slowly growing into confident, vibrant creations. Hope flourished in the safety of their new home, her laughter filling the once quiet halls, and Ethan found himself rediscovering a sense of purpose that had eluded him for so long. But the final test came one evening when Lucy's ex-partner, emboldened by his threats, attempted to approach the property. The security team intercepted him before he could get close, and the police arrived within minutes to arrest him. The incident, though terrifying, marked a turning point for Lucy. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of fear begin to lift. In the aftermath, Ethan and Lucy sat together, reflecting on everything they had endured. "You've changed my life," Lucy said quietly. "You've given me and Hope a chance I never thought we'd have." Ethan shook his head. "You've changed mine too. I thought I was helping you, but the truth is, you've helped me more than you know. You've reminded me of what really matters: connection, love, and the courage to stand by the people we care about." As the months passed, Lucy and Ethan worked together to create a foundation that provided support for women and children escaping abusive situations. Lucy's story became a beacon of hope for others, and her art, now celebrated by many, carried messages of resilience and healing. The grand opening of their foundation was a celebration of everything they had overcome. Lucy stood on stage, holding Hope in her arms, and spoke to the crowd. "This isn't just about me and my daughter," she said, her voice steady and strong. "It's about every woman and child who's ever felt alone, who's ever felt like they had nowhere to turn. This is a place where they can find hope, just like we did." Ethan joined her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "This journey has shown me that true wealth isn't measured by what you have, but by what you give. And together, we can create a world where no one has to face their struggles alone." The applause that followed was thunderous, but it wasn't just for Lucy and Ethan. It was for the message they carried, the belief that even in the darkest moments, there is always a way forward. For those watching this story, the message is clear. No matter how lost or broken you may feel, there is always hope. There are people who care, who will stand by you, and who will help you rebuild. And each of us has the power to be that light for someone else. If this story has inspired you, share your thoughts in the comments. Let's start a conversation about resilience, kindness, and the power of community. And if you want to be part of a journey that celebrates hope and transformation, subscribe to our channel. Together, we can create a ripple effect of compassion and change, one story at a time.